A lot of people don't know what a fractal actually is. So I'm glad you asked that question. A fractal is a self-similar image that begins to repeat itself in smaller and smaller scales. And so when you look at that in a fractalized image, which we know that artistically can be rendered, when we look at the nature of reality, we found out that fractals also exist in reality, in our real world, our third dimensional realm, I should say. And they decided to look as close as they could into matter. And the deeper they look, the more they realize that the whole can be revealed in the smallest part. And in the smallest part, they discovered that it's just a fractal of the whole. So we've discovered now, that scientists being we, that everything in the third dimension exists as a fractal of something much larger. And that can be taken from not only the physical concept, even into the philosophical concept. And so what made me really want to get into this, back in 2016, I was asked to do a class or a lecture at a big conference, which was going to be the following year, like in about 7 months. And I was thinking, what topic should I pick for that lecture? It's going to be a 3.5-hour lecture. And I wanted something really exhilarating. And I had already kind of been looking into fractals and doing my research on it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to dive in extremely deep into this because it's really intriguing. And a lot of people don't even know it exists. So once I dove deep into it and started getting into the Mandelbrot set and fractal mathematics, I brought that to the conference, and the conference was an absolute hit. The lecture was a hit, a standing ovation. It was one of my best conferences, and a lot of the information that I utilized to create that research way back in 2016 actually made it into the book.
Now, you talk about fractal mathematics. Tell us a bit about that, because people might have in mind fractal universe as a very ethereal, philosophic idea. For instance, the Hermeticists of the distant past had a way of talking about it. It's there in Hermeticism. But since that time, we've learned a lot more about maths and a lot more about the physical cosmos. What flesh and bones have been added to the idea of fractalization through mathematics?
Well, once Mandelbrot came out with the Mandelbrot set equation, a few people started looking at it like, how can we actually put this to the test? And it went into Pixar Studios, and some of the designers in Pixar Studios took the fractal mathematical equations and added them into their animation software. And they came up with the very first animation software at Pixar Studios that creates every scene as it's needed on the fly, just as quantum physicists are suggesting that our reality is created on the fly, wave-particle duality. And so once they inputted the code into their software, they realized that the animation was creating itself. The background scenes, the mountains, the oceans, the waves in the ocean, the buildings, the structures, everything, nature, and even the actual animated characters themselves were all being created by this simple fractal mathematical numerical formula. And they realized that, wow, this literally is how our universe is working. And so once they did that, more people started digging into it. A group of 14 college students decided to take that same code and put it into a program, a gaming program called No Man's Sky. It fits on one DVD, and it holds 80 quadrillion planets, unlimited life forms, and the game actually never ends. So we see that we've created an entire universe on a DVD utilizing the same fractal mathematic formula. So it's an amazing formula that literally describes exactly how everything in this realm has come into being. Not that it happened by mistake, but that this mathematical code is evidence or a fingerprint of a creator.
So in the 21st century, we are applying fractal mathematics to create things, and
Yes.
to create things that are far more real visually than we've ever created before. Is it, you say it tells us something about the process of creation of the cosmos.
Yeah.
Talk to that a little bit, because some people might say, well, isn't this just another way of saying there's mathematics to everything we're looking at? How does it
Right.
go deeper than that?
Oh, it goes much deeper. So what scientists did was that at CERN, at the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, they smashed these particles together in Switzerland. And they found out that at the very heart of matter, we actually have only light. I mean, there's more things that happen. Of course, you have quarks and muons and all these other particles and so forth. But at the deepest level, everything exists as a wave of potentials in superposition until a conscious mind collapses it into solidity. So the reality is everything exists as waves of light waves that we can't particularly see with our own eyes because we can only see 1% of the light spectrum or less. But these waves actually do exist. And what it means is that all the ancients were correct. The ancient sages, the wisdom keepers, even in the biblical text, in other religious texts, we are living in a creation. This proves that we're living in a creation, and it's a designed creation. Professor Sylvester James Gates Jr., who's a professor at the University of Maryland, former scientific advisor to President Obama, got together with a group of super mathematicians, and they discovered this fractal mathematic code, which they not the fractal mathematic code, they discovered the Adinkra codes, which are hidden within the fractals. And these codes are called Adinkra codes, named after the Dogon tribe of Mali's actual symbols that they have been writing. Nobody knew that these symbols and these artistic renderings that were being created by the Dogon tribe of Mali, Africa, all these thousands of years, if you take them and turn them into three-dimensional objects, they actually reveal fractals and this other code called Adinkra codes, which are really error-correcting codes. And so Professor James Gates and his team discovered that these error-correcting codes that are hidden within the fractals of nature and life itself are the same exact codes that run search engines and web browsers. There's no difference. So you can see we've only rediscovered an existing code that exists and utilized it to create the browser that I'm actually talking to you through right now.
Yes.
And it controls and runs it. And so at the heart of nature itself, these are the codes that create the realm and the reality that we're actually living in. And it leads again back to an actual source creator that embedded this code here. So to me, it proves that we're living in a creation. It proves the existence of a God, the universe, a higher source, or whatever you want to call it.
So in a sense, we can only discover codes that actually exist. The codes really are the fingerprint of God, to use that language.
Yeah.
Where does that take us in terms of theology? Because way back we had a philosophical system of deism that said, well, God was the intelligence that started everything off, and laws have been put in place to ensure that everything unfolds as was originally intended. Does it get us to an image of God like that, who's just the clockmaker? Or is there something more subtle that goes on with fractalization?
I personally believe that it gives us a connection to a much higher source, and that we realize because we're completely embedded inside of this matrix, that everything that exists at the largest level exists at the smallest level. And so that's all inside of our body. So the divine spark that created everything in the universe is within us, and we're within it. And so we're just another expression of this universe. We're another wave of potentials experiencing itself subjectively. And from my perspective, it makes me feel like I'm more directly connected to the creator, and the creator is directly connected to me, and that we are actually one, and all of us are just one. We are all one, experiencing life subjectively through different perspectives. And I think this is a real big thing. For some people, they think, oh man, we're just living in a hologram and we're not real. No, we are truly real, and we are having these experiences, but collectively we're creating reality. And to me, that's so exciting that we have this direct connection to source, and that we don't have to go through a middleman or a middle deity, that we ourselves are directly connected energetically and spiritually. And this realm itself is this fractal mathematical holographic universe. It's a realm that potentially maybe even is a proving ground or a testing ground for consciousness to experience itself and learn more about what it's like to be in the third dimension.
It's so interesting where you're going with this, Billy, because I arrive at exactly these same conclusions through the study of ancient texts, through shamanic narrative traditions all around the world, everything you've just said, these are the conclusions that I'm reaching. And in the past, we've had hints of what you've just said. So Hermeticism had the idea that by looking at very small observable things here, you'd come to understand the universe and how it really is. And then in Jesus, we've got amazing sayings in the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus says, if you use the root meanings, that the whole cosmic realm is inside us. The kingdom of heaven is within you, is the familiar translation. And so the idea again that if we peer into ourselves, we'll understand something profound about the cosmos. And if we peer into the cosmos, we'll understand something very profound about ourselves. And then light, the properties of light that you just mentioned. I think it was in the 13th century that a Christian bishop, Robert Grosseteste, through studying texts and a little bit of observation of the stars, came to the conclusion that everything is made of light, that we will not understand the cosmos until we understand the properties of light, which is a huge leap forward towards the science we have today. But where you take this goes beyond that and goes to the question of the human experience, human consciousness. What is it, and can we experience it differently? When we get our heads around the fractal holographic universe, what are your thoughts about what we can do differently? How can we live our lives differently in the light of it?
Yeah, and that's a great question and phenomenal summary. Let's presuppose your brain is a fractal of the universal mind. Now, what happens with your brain? Your brain is encased in darkness. It doesn't have any idea what's going on outside, but your brain does have friends. All your sensory perceptions, right? So you're touching, smelling, hearing, tasting, seeing. It says to its friends, hey, you guys go out there and collect me some data so I can figure out what's going on. The friends go out and they start touching, smelling, tasting, hearing, feeling, seeing. They themselves don't understand the data that they are collecting. They can only collect the information. They collect the data and transmit it through electrical signals back to the brain. The brain then takes that data, that raw data, and sorts it all out. And then the brain actually projects a hologram, and you navigate through that hologram that your brain took in from information, data collected from its sensory perception friends. So what does that mean? On the larger scale, let's go back to the macro now. Imagine that the universe is a mind, a conscious entity. Now let's take a look at that. Who are the universal mind's friends? Well, that would be Paul Wallis, Billy Carson, right? Your neighbor, your wife, your son, your whatever, right? So we ourselves, all the sentient beings throughout the entire known universe, and even the non-sentient beings, are all out here collecting data. By how? By living our actual lives. By doing what we do on a daily basis, we are collecting data. And I believe that we are consciously transmitting that information back to the source. And the source is learning what it's like to be me, you, and everyone else and everything else that exists in the known universe. And the reason why this is important is because it lets you know that we have a direct connection and that everything potentially is conscious. Everything is transmitting information back to source, and source has the omnipresence, and it's gaining all of this data, and it's understanding what is it like to be everything that exists in this realm.
I love this concept. I first discovered it in Phaedo, Plato's book,
Yes.
where he argues that consciousness came first, and that everything in the material cosmos exists in order for that consciousness to experience itself and to have experiences. The whole cosmos is on a learning journey, and your learning journey and mine are really a fractalization of that. And I love how you put it, that the universe is experiencing itself through my sense of sight, through my sense of taste, so on and so forth. This idea about the origins of the cosmos was really already in mainstream thought and conversation 2,000 years ago. Somehow, though, it never quite made it onto the mainstream syllabus of our schools and churches. And I'm going to come back to that. Yeah. But around about the time that Christianity was beginning, it was something that people had some understanding of. So much so that there's a moment in the New Testament when the Apostle Paul gives a definition of God as the Greeks understood it. This is the Greek word theos. And he said, theos means the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being, of which we are all offspring. And what I love about that definition is there's no separation in it. You and I couldn't be more intimately connected with the source. There's nothing we have to do to get back to the source. We are all emanations of the source.
Exactly.
And as you were saying, Billy, that we should fully expect to be having divine experiences, thinking divine thoughts, feeding information to the divine through our own experiences. And I find that once I took that notion on board, I began seeing evidences of this all around me. And it was a far more empowering kind of approach to life and consciousness and spirituality than I'd had before. I wonder for you, Billy, if you found any practices that you use from day to day to help this insight really enter into your lived experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's another great question. As a lot of people know, I coached basketball. I coached in particular women's basketball for quite some years. I was a Team USA Junior Olympic coach. I was an AAU coach, USSSA coach. And over the course of time, I acquired about 15 gold medals over 8 years. And so I'm coaching at the I'm coaching at the highest level for that group. And I'm in youth development. And I'm at an exposure tournament where college coaches come from all over the country to scout players that I have in the gym running scrimmages and running tournaments. And the best player in the gym, I mean, this girl was so phenomenal. It was like you can implant her from high school directly into the WNBA, and she would be a starter in the WNBA at that time. This is years ago, but that's how phenomenal she was. And everyone was on her. All the college coaches were looking at her. And then they started all little by little dropping off as I was going around getting my feedback. They started turning their eyes towards other players. And I'm going, man, this girl's the best player in the gym. They can't see this. I don't understand what's going on. And so I got to one coach and I was talking to one coach and she was telling me the main thing that we don't like about her is that she's disrespectful to her gear and her tote bag and even some of her own teammates. So they're looking and they're recognizing several things. She's not taking care of her own items. Now, why is this important? And she's disrespecting other people. It's important because if you understand the double slit experiment in quantum physics, where they were shooting electrons through a small microscopic slit inside of a tiny, tiny box, and on the back wall, they expected to see a digital pattern of little electrons hitting the back of that board. And they even tried it with photons. The same exact thing happened. On the backboard, there was actually a wave pattern. So where there should have been digital bits of information, the particles or the photons turned into waves. And so they put a little camera inside the box to see exactly what was going on. And when they put the camera to look and see, the particles decided to become particles again and hit the back of the wall in two strips of lines as digital bits of information. They took the camera away, went back to waves. Put the camera back, went back to digital bits of information. So they realized something, that matter, at the heart of matter itself, it's conscious and aware that it's being observed. And what does it have to do with taking care of your stuff? Well, when I realized that every atom in this microphone that I'm talking into is conscious because it has electrons orbiting it. When I recognize that every atom in this glass, this mug that I'm holding on to, is conscious, I'm going to, if I understand the power of consciousness and sentience, I'm going to treat it with respect. Imagine if you could take a child and you can teach them that everything that exists, whether it's biological, non-biological, what appears to be quote unquote man-made, is actually alive and conscious, and to treat it with respect and dignity and love. Imagine how they would take care of this stuff from the time they were very little until they grow up. So you have to learn how to revere. So I learned to revere everything, to understand that everything needs to be treated properly and with care and with respect and dignity. So it changes your whole outlook on everything that exists in the known universe, including yourself. Everything that you actually have that you quote unquote believe you own, you treat that with respect and dignity. Everything that everyone else has, you treat that with respect and dignity. And of course, because you understand consciousness at a high level, you then begin to try to treat everyone out there as you would like to have yourself treated, right? So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so that old saying holds true, but it all starts with practicing the understanding that everything is alive and everything has meaning.
When you said that, my mind immediately went to ways we behave instinctually, particularly when no one's watching, when we will talk to inanimate things, especially if we're trying to get them to do what we want them to do. I mean, many of us speak to our cars if they're not working properly, for instance. A lot of gardeners talk to their plants, so on and so forth. Come on, you can do it. We have this feeling that there is another pattern of causation that we're not taught in church or in school, that we can manipulate reality because everything is conscious. How real is that? Does this insight point to the possibility that we can invoke causalities quite different to the ones we've learned in school?
Oh, I believe we can. We can definitely create these causalities because guess what? We have something amazing. We have two things actually working for us in our favor that we all have, well, most of us actually have the capability, is we have our own vocal box that actually works, right? So we have cymatic frequencies that are emanating from our vocal box. No matter what language you're speaking, it doesn't really matter because the vibration backed by conscious thought. So the vibrations coming out, the conscious thought wave pattern is getting embedded into that cymatic frequency and it's traveling out from you. And it's going to encounter everything in its path that the wave can actually interact with. And those vibrations are going to make those atoms vibrate at different rates. And those electrons are going to take in that vibration, the protons and everything else. And so my personal feeling in reality is that we have an effect on what we consider to be inanimate objects. We have an effect on these things because of our cymatic frequencies and our conscious thoughts. Now, of course, there needs to be a lot more tests done on this, but we do know things like telekinesis by some of the Tibetan monks, the ability to move things with your mind, and also Tibetan monks' the ability to move giant stones with vibrations from their vocalization of mantras. So these things have been done before and documented. A lot more rigorous scientific study should be done on it. But I do believe that we definitely have the effect on the realm and the reality within our reality tunnel as we speak and think and how we want things to be. And I think that a person that's on a low frequency, that's always talking bad to their own items, talking bad to their car, and thinking bad thoughts at the same time, they usually have a lot of problems coming right back at them because the universe is like a mirror. It gives you back what you put out. But yes, people who are giving care and love and respect and asking nicely and thinking positive thoughts, they always seem to have a slightly better life. They still have bad things happen or negative things happen to them, but it always seems like they seem to get over those things and continue to move forward, right? But other people that have a problem for every solution, they're always being held back, and they always have another problem for another problem. So I think we have causality in our vocal box and our conscious thought.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And I can think of three groups of people who straight away would relate to what you've just said. One group would be people who speak for a living. So teachers, preachers, who know that by changing their tone of voice, they can change the atmosphere in the room. They can change how people feel. Healers will know this, and I've had the experience myself of speaking to things we would think of as not conscious. So speaking to an injury or speaking to a condition and then seeing a response. And I've had many experiences like that are mind-boggling and that have left me thinking, how on earth can that possibly work? But it's been that way round, where I've seen the connection and then thought, well, how is this working? Dentists today, I don't know if this happens in the States, but it happens in the UK in the way dentists are trained there, and it happens in Australia, that dentists are taught to use specific frequencies in their voices in order to impact the state of mind of their patients. So all those people would be sitting thinking, yes, there is something to this, that intention, thought, consciousness, voice, these are all ways in which we can manipulate or alter our reality. And another way in which Plato talked about this was emotional vibration, that if we operate in a place of fear, then the universe or our subconscious will continue to provide us with things to be fearful of. Or if we're vibrating in a state of anger, the universe will continue to provide us with things to be angry about. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we're vibrating at the level of creativity, love, compassion, then the opportunities to express that will abound. And I think that's really an undergirding aspect of what people talk about when they describe the law of attraction, that people are noticing these other causalities that we can begin to play with. And as I say, I've seen this is real through my own life. You've had experiences that show this is not theory only. So here's the question I wanted to return to. How do we keep forgetting this? Because in every age, there's been some understanding of this. We talked about Thoth, Plato, Jesus, Robert Grosseteste. They all had some understanding of this. How is it that this has not made its way into our mainstream schools, churches? Why do we not all know this? Is there some sense in which this information is not welcome, or this information has been suppressed?
Yeah, this information has definitely been heavily suppressed. It rises and falls just like civilizations rise and fall. And so you can see this undulating pattern over time through many different civilizations. The Aboriginals of Australia, the Lakota tribe and the Hopi tribes of the Americas. A lot of these indigenous tribes all have this same understanding of the reality that we're living in. They call it sleepy time, that this world is not actually real, that are alluding to the fact that it is a holographic universe. The ancient Egyptians pre-dynastic era in the land of Kemet have the same exact understanding. Why does this information come to the forefront and then fall away? It's because people who are able to assume a high level of power at some point take the notion of the idea that everyone has the power. We're all connected and we all can learn to walk in our power, and we can unite and we can love and respect one another. That doesn't play well into their paradigm, because the paradigm that they want is a control paradigm. And in a control paradigm, there's one thing that must happen: divide and conquer. You cannot control the narrative if everyone is on the same accord. You must break people apart. You must separate them. You must have them going at each other, angry with each other, thinking one is better than the next one. And once you get that going, then you have everything you need, the perfect recipe to create the control paradigm. And once they get that control paradigm, they don't want to relinquish it or let it go. And so it seems to last for centuries at a time until the collapse of that empire. And then you get another empire that rises, and then they squash the understanding and the concept of this vital information once again as they start to take control of that entire civilization. So this rise and fall of these corrupt oligarchs are the main reason, in my opinion, that we see this rise and fall of this knowledge.
So, brothers and sisters, if you've not picked this up, if you want to break out of that matrix, Fractal Holographic Universe is the book to read. It really is an exhilarating read. I really enjoyed it. I've written a commendation for it myself, and it's a deeply empowering book. If you want to get hold of Fractal Holographic Universe, you can go to Forbidden Knowledge, available on Amazon. And is it wherever books are sold?
Yeah, pretty much. It's everywhere now. It's a bestseller. At its highest point, it reached #1 in fractal mathematics, #1 in quantum theory, and number 4 in science and philosophy. So it's now been adopted and accepted everywhere.
Now, the worldview most of us grow up with when we think about the origins of humanity is largely shaped by religion and or science in its post-19th century iterations. So on the one hand, if we grow up with a religious worldview, whether it's Muslim or Jewish or Christian, in particular the theistic religions, we are given a view that God has decided what human beings are going to be. This is how we're created. What you see is what you get. This is our level of intelligence and consciousness. End of story. There's no real invitation to become more than we are or to go exploring. And similarly, if we think about the sort of post-Darwinian view of humanity that says we have evolved to this point, again, it's a what you see is what you get kind of story. There's no real mystery or invitation to ascend and become more or expect to have deeper, more powerful experience of life. It's just, this is where we are. In the text you're describing, it's not quite like that. How do these ancient texts and ancient writers see things differently to that?
Oh, yeah, they see things much differently. A lot of the texts that we're referencing inside the Epic of Humanity are, pre-monotheistic mindset. So a lot of this information are people that are believing in multiple gods. And these multiple gods that they're talking about end up being referenced in several incredible texts, predominantly in the Babylonian and Assyrian texts. And when you really break down these multiple gods, you discover that they aren't really the creators of the universe, that they seem to have been masquerading as gods. And that because of their high level of knowledge and potential high level of technology, the people around them deified them and proclaimed them to be actual gods. And they played off of that, and they used the people in a way that they shouldn't have used them. Not all of them, but some of them. And so the mindset was this pantheon mindset, these pantheons of gods. And the first pantheon wasn't in Greece. The first pantheon was in Sumeria, in Mesopotamia. And then you see these gods referenced in other civilizations around the world, and you realize they're all talking about the same exact people. So then you have the understanding that these people were global, that they had made their way around the planet. You find the Sumerian pantheon of Enki and Lil and Nu and so forth. You find them in Nigazida. You find them in Egypt. There's the Natiru, right? The Natiru, according to the ancient pre-dynastic Egyptians, are the gods that came from heaven to earth and turned mud into a kingdom at the time of Zep Tepi. And then you see them, of course, you see them in Greece as Odin and Zeus and so forth. Then you also see them, in even in China as Wang Di. You see them you see one of the gods in Australia as Thothamabi. You see them throughout the Mesoamerica region, which is now Mexico and South America. Lord Pakal, Kukulkan, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl. But they end up all being mostly the same individuals roaming around this planet, interacting and engaging mankind. And so from the people's perspective, they saw these beings as actual gods because they became cargo cults. They believed that these people were supernatural, when in true reality, I believe they were just physical, corporeal beings that had a higher level of knowledge and they had advanced technology. And that was a perspective that they wrote about these gods from, though, that from a spiritual aspect, even being that these beings may not have been that spiritual as they seem to have used humanity in some cases in a very, very wrong and bad way.
For sure. You've gone straight to where I wanted to go next, which was to ask you to pin down what exactly you think these gods were. Who were they? Where were they from? Because I think when we use the word gods today, certainly those of us who've had a Western education, we immediately think of imaginary, mythological, these are just ideas. Whereas when the ancients used the words that we've translated as gods, they didn't mean that at all. They were talking about flesh and bone people. But from where, who were they? What did the ancients have to say about that?
The more I looked into, where are these beings from? Of course, there's some books that have come out that say they're from this planet named Nibiru and so forth. I did find Nibiru, a reference to Nibiru and the Anunnaki in the Enuma Elish, the older version of the Enuma Elish in the 7 tablets of creation. But I said there must be a lot more to this because they're monuments on Earth. These megalithic structures are all aligning with these different star systems. And then I started looking into artifacts, And a lot of these ancient artifacts were referencing the Pleiadian star system. They were either depicted in the artifact or the artifact was a reference directly to the Pleiadian stars. So I started digging into any knowledge I could find about the Pleiadian star cluster, which viewed from Earth appear to be 6 bright stars on a clear dark night, even though there's really many more stars in that part of the sky. There used to be 7 bright stars, but 1 star actually ran out of fuel and became a white dwarf, which you can't see with the naked eye anymore. But through the research, I discovered through many different texts that there were people living in planets orbiting in that star system, and that at some point they went to war. It was a galactic war. And in some of the references in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, the weapons that were used were like straight out of a sci-fi movie. They had the Brahmahanda Astra, which could destroy any man on 3 worlds. They had weapons that when they were released, they could not be stopped or thwarted. They had weapons that can literally blow up planets like a Death Star. And I believe that through these wars, planets were being blown up, habitable moons were being blown up, and the debris was floating through that sector of space. And that debris created a problem for people that weren't even involved in the war, and of course, people that were. And so you have a chunk of planet colliding with your planet, you know it's going to be a global disaster. So what do you have to do? If you have the capability, you flee. This is the very first account in history, I believe, of people becoming space refugees. And they began to flee that region of the sky and head out to other star systems: Orion, Aldebaran, Ursa Minor, Draco, Sirius A, B, and C, and so forth and so on. And they began to inhabit other planets and start breakaway civilizations. But all of these groups were all from that same region of space. Some came down to this Earth and created a breakaway civilization here. And I believe that according to the text, it says that they worked themselves. They did the labor. They were actually doing the clearing of the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers and creating the canals and building cities. And at some point they decided the work was too much, and a decision was made to take the existing hominid on this planet, it was already here, our cousins, to add their essence to it, which in my opinion means genetically modify it and get it to bear the load, they say. And at that point they did that. Then the hominid was converted into Homo sapien and became a slave without knowing it was a slave. How? Because they believed that they were doing the work of the gods. And I think that's exactly what happened here. And that Earth became a gigantic cargo cult at some point. So that's what they were doing. They were literally creating a breakaway civilization. I think a lot of them hailed from the Pleiades.
The story you just described repeats all around the world. It's told in the pages of the Bible with the arrival of the Tseva Hashemayim, the sky armies. It's told in the Sumerian stories of the Enuma Elish and the stories that follow from that. It's there in the Vedas, Norse story, Celtic story, Greek story. And it was those correlations that really first grabbed my attention, that made me think there is a shared memory that is being expressed in this great diversity of stories around the world. And I love how when you talk about the gods, you call them people, because it's quite clear they're not idealized, conceptualized, ethereal, transcendent beings. They are flesh and bone beings who are every bit as flawed as you or I, or as the nations of the world today. And it's very easy to relate to the conflicts and the competition that we read about in these stories. And I keep coming back to Plato, but I'm fascinated by the fact that he was really on top of this. And when he primed people to understand the world's stories of the gods, he said, just be clear that gods can mean one of two things. It can be a mythological, personalized, anthropomorphic way of talking about stars and planets, but it can also refer to beings who are very similar to us. They've just got more advanced technology.